Hello everyone. What we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about two different technologies in AscentialTest that extend object recognition beyond standard controls. So we're talking about RenderText and RenderImage, and even those of you that might be familiar with them, you might learn some new things about it today. So we're going to talk about how RenderText and RenderImage are useful. I'm going to teach you how to enable RenderText if you've never done it before. It's quite easy. We're going to do something kind of complex. We're going to build a table from textual components using RenderText. Then we're going to talk about RenderImage, and we're going to learn actually how to combine RenderImage with standard controls, which will be interesting. And I'm also going to talk about how to click in locations that are relative to RenderText or RenderImages. So that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm not really going to use slides today. I'm mostly going to just demonstrate for you. And of course, if you have any questions, we're going to take those at the end. So just jot I think you can put them in anytime you want, and then Sandra will read them to me when the time comes. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show you how to enable RenderText if you've never done it before. So I have a target application here, and this is a Power Builder application called PB Ultimate Suite. So we're using that as our target today. And I've got UA Server here now in front of you, and I just want to show you how easy it is to turn on the feature RenderText. So basically you just edit or just double click on your application profile in UA Server. And if you slide the scroll bar down, you see a section called RenderText. It's in any profile, any application profile that allows for RenderText. Some of them don't. For example, if you're testing a web application, you won't see RenderText. And the reason is it's not necessary, because on the web, everything is a WebLM, so AscentialTest is going to recognize it. Whereas in other types of environments, like a Windows application or a Power Builder application, there could be elements that are not handles. They're not heavy objects. They don't have a handle, so it's not a real element or a web element, but you still want to be able to recognize it as an object. So you can enable this feature called RenderText, and there's nothing more than checking the checkbox. Don't touch any of the other settings unless you're directed to do that by Xenix support. So you just turn it on, you click OK. Now you do have to restart the target application because it puts an additional hook into the application. So if your application is up when you do this, bring it down, bring it back up again, and then you'll be all set. That's really all there is to it. Now what I want to do is I've already taken a couple snapshots with RenderText on and RenderText off, and I want to show you the difference. So here is a snapshot that was taken without RenderText. And you'll see, we've got a bunch of these elements that I'm clicking on, and you're seeing them light up. But watch what happens when I switch over here. You'll notice those same elements, but now they actually have RenderText underneath them. So there's an additional, in the snapshot, there's an additional element, and that's our RenderText element. And typically the default path for that element is going to be its text. And so you're going to see an @text, like in here, recently opened. Now that can be really useful, being able to see the text of objects. And I'll give you an example here using the toolbar. So if we look at the toolbar, we'll look at it in this snapshot, you'll see here's the toolbar, but there's nothing under it. So there's our toolbar. And if I go over to this other snapshot where RenderText is on, here's the toolbar, but then look underneath it. You've got all of these pieces of text, which again could be useful. So let me just enlarge this a little bit so we can see it. So because there's render text associated with this spot here on the toolbar, I could just take and drag that over and drop it. And now I've got an object. So if I wanted to, for example, click on it, I would just say pbus.toolbar.about. So once you define the object, it's just like any other object in AscentialTest. You can forget about the fact that it's render text because it's just going to behave like any other object. You could get the text from it if you wanted to. You could click on it. Those are the primary things that you're going to do with an element like that. Okay, so it shows up in the elements tree, and of course you can define it by dragging it over. And if we look at the path of the object, you'll see that it's the text of the object. And we give it the Z class as WinText. So you're going to see it defined as WinText, but its actual class is RenderText. Now, you can do a lot more with RenderText than just get the text and click on it. And we're going to see an example now that's a lot more complex. So here's an application that's actually a .NET application. So in WinForms, there's a WinForms application. You can tell that because of the WFM prefix, WinForms. So you can use RenderText in a .NET WinForms application as well. And you see, this is a pretty complex object. So it's a custom object. It's called a sand grid. And that's a third-party control. So AscentialTest doesn't know how to interpret this element. If it was a standard grid in .NET, certainly AscentialTest would be able to recognize it. But because it's custom, we can't. So RenderText is a really useful way to do that. And I'm going to show you an example that I've already built so I can just explain it, but then I'm going to build it in front of you so that you know how to do it. One of the keys to an element like this, a complex element, is a class that we've introduced in AscentialTest called RenderScrollWindow. And the reason why we built that class is because, you know, when you have a complex table like this, it can scroll in both directions. It can scroll horizontally or vertically. So if we're trying to interact with a row that's out of view or a column that's out of view or both, AscentialTest needs to be able to scroll it into view. So if you're curious about it and you want to learn more, if you go to the help and you look at RenderScrollWindow, you'll find that there's a help page on the RenderScrollWindow that explains it and explains how it works. And if you click on this link down below, you'll see that there's an action called Scroll into View that you can click, or you can call, sorry, if you want to scroll something into view that's not in view. So just wanted to show you where the help is in case you want to look at it and learn more about it. But let's talk about the table. So this is not a table that you can just take and drag over like a .NET grid or a data window in a Power Builder application or even a web table on the web. You know, sometimes you can drag them over, sometimes you have to use the wizard, but in this case, you really have to do it yourself. And the reason is because AscentialTest could never make sense of just a bunch of text without a little bit of help from you. But you will see that I did create a definition of a header. And so when I click on the header, you notice that the header lights up. And if we look at the path of the header, we see that it's the render text. And you're going to see that with render text, when it's a complex, you know, when it's a pattern that's arranged like this, there's two very useful attributes. One of them is called vert order, which is the vertical order. And the other one is called hors order. And you can see them both here if we just click on a piece of render text. we see the hors order here, and we see the vert order here. So those are two key attributes of a piece of render text that will allow you to form a table. Because you can imagine if you have a lot of text, but you have these two attributes, then you can arrange it into a pattern or a grid, like I've done here. And if I click on them, you'll notice they all light up. So once I put them inside of the header, which has the vert order of this arrangement of text set to 1, and by the way, I've used an advanced feature. I've grouped them by all. So that means that all of the elements, the render text elements that have the vertical order equal to 1, they're now seen as one object because I've grouped them together. So that's the header. And then if I can just drag them over. Well, actually, I think if I drag them over, I have to help them. We'll see when I do it. Okay, so there's the header. Then the row, remember the path of the header was render text with a vert order was equal to 1. Well, we don't want the header to be part of the row. So here, again, same attribute, the vert order greater than 1. So this is all the other pieces of render text grouped together by the attribute vert order. This is key as well. So here, if I took that out, we would just get a lot of render text, and you're going to see that when I build it in front of you. But here it's already been grouped into 14 rows. And then again, if I click on the columns light up. And you'll see I'm using something called overlap. That's a keyword that you might not be familiar with. And basically I'm saying that this column overlaps, you might use below, which is similar. Overlap is a little bit different because if this ever got scrolled out of view, it's better to use overlap than below. Okay, so this is the column that is below the header dot track. So now that you kind of have a sense of how it works, let me go and build one in front of you. And so I'm going to start out by, I need to create the render scroll window first. Now, the tricky part for you, I think, would be just sort of trying to figure out, well, what is the table? Do I use this one or do I use this one? I think they would actually both work, but my practice is always to take the one that's most inward and use that one as the base for my scroll window. So let me actually collapse this down first so that I have room. And I'm going to drag this over and drop it. Now watch what happens when I do. Not much. All it does is put a placeholder in there because it doesn't know, AscentialTest can't know that this is a render scroll window, but I can just come over here, and remember I said we're going to do this manually. I can come over here and find the class. So there's my render scroll window. And I can't call it track listing again, right? Because if I did, it would cause a compile error. So I'm going to call it track listing 2. Now at this point, nothing matches because I don't have a path. But I can lift my path here, copy and paste it here. And then I do have at least the area that makes up the table defined. So that's step 1. Is defining that area and giving it a path. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to create the header. And to do that, again, a lot of this is manual. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to insert a row after, and I'm going to indent it underneath it. And I'm going to come down here to my class. And I will find here in the, let's see, let me just cheat by looking and seeing how I did it here. Yeah, so I created an app object, so that's what I'm going to do again. I'm going to come here and I'm going to select app object. I'm going to call it a header. Now you might recall that app object is kind of the base object of everything. So it's the parent of everything in terms of the class hierarchy. Now here I'm going to put in RenderText, but watch what happens when I do. It's kind of a mess because it's going to match every single piece of RenderText. So there's 102 pieces of RenderText that are a child of that thing that I've now called track listing. But what we can do is we can start to give it some order. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to click on this here and I'm going to say group by all. Okay. Still not quite there because it's matching everything and I don't want it to. I need it to match the things that are only the vert order of 1. So I'm going to key in and I'm going to say this is the vert order. And I got to get my case right too. So that's the vertical order equal 1 and then close the square bracket. And then when I do that, notice how just the header lit up. Now the next thing I want to do is I need to take the parts. Now dragging over only creates a placeholder in this case. But again, what I can do here is I can come to my drop down and I can find win text. So I'm going to make these all win text. And I'm going to call this track. And now I just need to give it a path. And in that case, I think I could just copy this and paste it, and that should work out just fine. And so now you see I've got the beginning of my header. Now, in the interest of time, I'm not going to do them all in front of you. I'm just going to copy the ones that I'm going to need to continue. Okay, because you got the idea. So I've got my header. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to get the row. So I'm going to add a line after again. And this time I need a class, right? Because a row is a class. So I'm going to call my class row. I'm going to base it on app object. And then I need to give my row a path. And here, remember the header was RenderText where the vert order was equal to 1, but here I want the vert order to be greater than 1. And I'm not quite finished yet. What I need to do also, and I think I probably typed something wrong, I'll figure that out in a second, but I need to, again, group, but this time I need to group by attribute, and I need that attribute to be the @vert order. Now, what have I done wrong? Let's see. I've got my row, got my app object as its base. I have my path, which is the RenderText @vert order greater than 1. I've grouped by, let's see, that should be matching. Let me just stare at it a second. See, this can be tricky even for me. So we've got, again, if I spell anything even slightly wrong, then I can cause a problem for myself. So we've got our class of row.
Brian?
Yes.
Yes, we have some comments in the question pane. Smaller is typed, should be greater than, not less than.
Oh, geez. Thanks for the help. Who is that?
Several. Several people answered.
That's good. They're paying attention. Thank you. It's always fun to do things in front of people. So there you have it. So now I've got my row where it is greater than 1. Now that I have my row, the rest of it's kind of easy. I can just take a piece of it now, and I can drag it over and drop it. It's not going to quite be right, but it's going to be close. You notice that what happened here was it defined only one because it took a very specific path. And that's where what I need to do is I need to make sure that my path is not going to only match the first row, the column in the first row, but I want it to match all of them. So this is where I'm going to use that keyword that I talked about, where it's the overlap X. And what I'm going to be overlapping is the header dot track, like that. And let's see, somebody else is going to probably notice something else in that. There we go. And now you notice it matches all of them. So once you get the pattern right, not really too hard to do that. So it's WinText, and then, I should give it a good name too, right? I should call it track. Okay, so now that you know that, how to do that, I'm just gonna, again, in the interest of time, I'm just gonna copy the two that I need to continue. So I'm gonna copy these here. So slowly I'm building my table. Now, the only thing I have left to do is to add a selector. So I'm going to right here, I'm going to insert a line here, come over and selector. We want it to be a string selector. And those of you that work with me in support know that I always like to start my selectors with the word select by. So I'm going to say select by song choice. That's what I'm going to call my selector. And then I need to give my selector a path. And so the path is going to be RenderText. And normally we're used to putting in the word contains when we start a selector, when we're using a real table like a grid or a data window or something. We say contains, but that's not how it works with RenderText, because RenderText doesn't contain, it is RenderText. So it's a subtle difference there. And sometimes I forget and I make that mistake and can't figure out why my my selectors are not working. So I'm going to say overlap X again, and I'm going to overlap, this time I want to overlap header dot song, and then I need the rest of it, right? Because that's just going to identify the right column. Now I need to put a comma or an and, either one would be fine. And I'm going to say that the @text attribute is, I can say like, or I can say equal. That's kind of up to you. And the way I'm going to do this one, so that I can put in a part of a song, make it easier, I'm going to say it's like, and then I'm going to do a double quote and a star, and then I'm going to put the actual select by song choice inside of curly brackets. This might be new to some people, even folks that, I see a mistake I made, but I'll fix it in a second. This might be new to people who've never created a path with a wildcard like I just did. But it's a convenient thing to be able to do. So if I've done it right, we'll find out in a second. So I say RenderText overlap X header.song, so that means it's only going to work on this column. And the text is like select by song choice, and let's just see if it works. So, I'll just do bad first and see, yeah, and it did. So it found the row with bad. Now, because I used wildcards, I could do something like, black, and that's actually going to work. And notice I don't have to put the star in there, the asterisk, because I built it into the path itself. That's I like to do it this way, so that if I'm going to use a partial match, I don't have to remember to do it in my test when I'm calling. And because I put it in the front and the back, actually, you know, I only need to put a piece of it and it'll work. So again, that might be new to you if you've never built a selector like that. So you basically just open up the double quote, put the wildcard, put the parameter name inside of curly's and then the wildcard, and then you can just put in a partial value and it will work. Okay. So that's what I wanted to show you about RenderText. Now what we're going to do is we're going to switch gears a little bit and we're going to talk about RenderImage. Now RenderImage is something that you do not need to enable in your profile. So remember RenderText, I had to go over to the UA server application profile and I had to turn the feature on. RenderText is always available to you. Okay. And I've not ever seen a situation where RenderText didn't work because it's really just a pattern match of pixels. So you should always be able to get it to work. However, it can be very tricky, and I'm going to show you some of the tricks that people need to know in order to be successful with it right away, because a lot of times just little tiny things can throw it off. So let's take a look at that now. So I'm going to switch over to this snapshot here. I'm going to make the scroll bar a little larger so you can see the toolbar, because I'm going to be working on the toolbar here. And so actually, you know what? I think I was using, yeah, I'm going to use this snapshot here. So this toolbar has already got a piece of render text in it, but I'm going to add some render images to it. Now, the way this works is you need to use whatever tool you like to use to capture images. So it can be snipping tool, it can be Snagit, anything will work that can capture an image. I know that when you're using snipping tool is a little weird because if it's a tiny image, it sometimes doesn't recognize that you've clipped an image, and you know it won't clip something really small. But there's plenty of other free tools out there that you can use. So I'm going to go after Open Employee right here, and I'm using TechSmith's capture. I just happen to like that one. So I'm going to go ahead, start my capture tool. And it's really, really important that I don't go outside of the parent of the image that I'm going to capture. And I'm going to do it for you later where I do go outside the image, and I'm going to show you what happens if I do. Now, it's not super important that you actually got every pixel of the image, as long as you get enough of them to recognize it. And you know, I'm going to do my best here to get what I want. I'm going to capture. Okay, I didn't quite get it centered, but that's okay. I think it's going to work anyway. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. And then I'm going to go back over to AscentialTest. So at this point, it's on my clipboard. I go to the parent that I want to define it as, and I right-click and I say Add Render Image. So again, I right-click, Add Render Image, paste it, and then give it a name. So this was called Open Employee. And if I click OK and I did it right, it should turn green, and it did. And you'll notice that not only did it turn green over here, but it actually added it to the snapshot. It was not there in the snapshot before. I think people sort of intuit that you would have to take a new snapshot in order to get it, but you don't. It'll be in your existing snapshots as well. So it's pretty easy to do when you do it, you know, correctly. Now, I want to show you where it's stored. It's right over here in your Explorer. You'll see under Render Images, and that section it's always there, but there's not usually anything in it. But it will sort of look a little bit like the app objects in that it gives you the path of the object. So you see the PBUS and you see the toolbar. So this is the path of the full path of that render image. And you can just double click on it and see what the image is. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create one. This time I'm going to purposely make a mistake. So here I'm going to bring up my tool, and I'm going to capture, and I'll go after new employee this time. Now, what I'm going to do purposely is I'm going to go outside of the boundaries of the parent. So here I'm not being as careful as I should. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. I'm going to come back into AscentialTest. And again, a lot of people make this mistake. I know, because this is a frequent tech support call. And I'm going to come over here to my toolbar, and I'm going to say add a render image, and I'm going to paste it. And I'm going to call this one new employee. And I'm going to say okay, but watch what happens this time. I didn't get a green check mark. It didn't show up in the snapshot because I went over the line. When I say go over the line, I went outside of the rectangle of the toolbar. I got to stay inside of there. Otherwise, I'm not going to get my object to match. And I grabbed a little tiny piece of the toolbar up above there. Now, you don't have to start over because remember, it's stored right here. And you can kind of see the mistake I made if you look carefully. There's a little gray piece there. Now, what I could do is I could take my capture tool again. And so let me just minimize AscentialTest to get it out of the way. And I'm going to recapture it. And this time I'm going to be more careful. And I'm going to get down really close to the object. And you notice that this tool has over in the just below the cursor there, it's got a little target so I can really hone in on my object. It's showing me every pixel so I can get a nice clean image. So I'm going to copy this to the clipboard. And then we'll go back to AscentialTest. And I'm going to bring it up and I'm going to just say copy clipboard again and click OK. And now you notice it matches. So again, it's not necessary to start over again. You just need to fix the image by coming over here to the render image areas, bringing it up, recopying what's on the clipboard, and then it all matches. Okay. So again, not hard to do as long as you follow the rules. Okay. So now I just want to check my notes and make sure that I didn't forget to tell you something. Yeah, okay, we covered that. Now what I want to do is I want to show you how you can use an object. It can be either a piece of render text or a piece of render image. Could actually even be a real image. But I want to show you how you can use something to click relative to it. And to do that, we're going to actually go to the new employee screen. Oops, sorry, clicked on the wrong thing. I'm going to go to new employee. And you'll notice when I show you the snapshot, I've got some, I used RenderText in order to identify these areas right here. And what I want to do is I want to enable life insurance, for this employee in the benefits section. So I want to do this. I want to just click over here. Now there might have been another way to do that. I can't remember, but because I want to teach you something, I'm going to teach you how I can click relative to this object here. And so we're going to take a look at a step that I created. But to do that, I need to introduce you maybe to some things that you've not encountered before in AscentialTest. And the first one is this built-in type called point. So there's a built-in type called point in AscentialTest, and point has two members, X and Y. It's basically a point. It's an XY coordinate. And again, built into AscentialTest in the UA class, which is here, we have an action that's called get cursor pause, meaning get cursor position. And so if I call get cursor pause and assign that value to the point, I can then use that point to click relative to the point. And you'll notice that what I'm doing before I do this is I'm clicking on new employee.life insurance. So if we look at that, new employee.life insurance is a piece of RenderText. So I defined it with RenderText. I'm going to click there first, and I put some sleeps in here, by the way, not that they're necessary. I did it because I want you to be able to see this running, because otherwise it would run so fast you wouldn't know what happened. But you're going to see the mouse go here first. I'll sleep for 3 seconds. Then I'm going to get the position of the cursor, and then to click on that spot that I wanted. I want the X, but I want to subtract from it. But the Y is right in the right plane, so I'm just going to leave the Y alone. So if I run this, you'll see that first, notice it clicked. If you look careful, you'll see the cursor. Then I'm clicking on that area, life insurance. I'm enabling that button, that little slider. And so you can see I set active, I clicked. You might know this already. Only our trace does not handle UA. It doesn't put the UA stuff in. It only puts in the stuff that really comes from an object. That's something we're going to do in the future to improve the trace, is to trace the UA stuff as well. So you only see this click on the trace, but you saw the other trace happen. So you know that it actually happened. Okay. Now I want to show you something really interesting. This was an interesting problem that a customer had. And this might surprise you, even if you are somewhat of an expert with AscentialTest. I know it surprised me when I was challenged by it. So here what we have is, and I'll make it a little larger so you can see. I've got this piece of WinForms. It's a top win, and it's got a tree in it. But this tree only has the items in it, not the checkboxes, because those checkboxes are not real checkboxes, as it turns out. It's really just an image. And there are two images. There's an image with a checkbox in it, and then there's an image that is empty. But they're just images. But what you can do is I'm going to go through this in detail because this is pretty strange. What you can do is you can build a table and a row that's based on the items and the images. So let's first look at the images. So here's the image of the checkbox that's unchecked. So I call it unchecked box right here. And then I have checked box, which is right here. So we've got two images, render images, that we took using our little capture tool. Now, the tree view itself was easy. That's just dragged over. That's a standard object in WinForms. It's just a WFM tree view. But its items, again, do not include the boxes, only the items that are in the tree. So to build the class, instead of just taking what would have been the items, I added to it the render image. And I just called it render images. I probably could have said unchecked and checked. I think that would have worked too, but I didn't need to. I just put in render image because there aren't any other render images in this hierarchy, so it wasn't necessary. So now a row is made up of item and render image, and it might be concerning some people that say, well, yeah, but there's only 6 of them. Well, that's because RenderText only sees what it's in front of, but that's okay, because when it scrolls, it'll see what's in the viewable space. That's not going to cause a problem. So don't let it trouble you if you do something like this and you see the numbers are different. Doesn't matter. Okay. And we've got 13 rows actually in this table. So here's item. Item doesn't really need a path because it is item. I could type item in there if I want to. I usually do, actually. And then there's the checkbox, which again is just render image. And notice it's matching all of them, whether they're checked or unchecked, because I called it RenderImage. However, in the selector, I didn't. And this is what's important. This is the part that I thought was pretty cool. So I've got two selectors. I've got a selector for unchecked by item text, and then I've got one called checked. And I'm going to prove to you how this all works. So I'm going to test the unchecked one first. Now, if I put in, and just so I don't have to type, I put these pieces of text off screen. If I put this value in, we would expect it to match because we're testing unchecked and we have an item in that row that is alongside of unchecked. Whereas, because I'm testing unchecked, if I put in right scalene, it's not going to match, right? Because right scalene is checked. Right scalene is checked, so we get a 0, which is what we would have expected. Now let's test the other one. So I'm going to come in here and, well, I'll start with right scalene this time because it's going to match. Now that matches because there is a checked box on the row with right scalene. Whereas if I take the other one that I used before, it's not going to match. So you can use these selectors now to tell you if the box is checked or unchecked, because you can check, you can do is present or wait until exists using the selector and know whether the item is checked or unchecked so that you know whether or not you should check it. You know, if you couldn't tell, clicking might actually, it's a toggle. If it was already checked, it might uncheck it. So it's important to be able to know its state if you want to set it. Just like, you know, with a regular checkbox, you don't have to worry. You could just say set state or check, and AscentialTest will know whether it's checked or unchecked before it decides whether or not it performs the action. You call check on a checkbox, it's not going to do anything because it's already checked, or unchecked on an unchecked. But this isn't a real checkbox. It's just an image. So the selector allows you to build in that kind of functionality into your test. So at runtime, you can tell whether it's checked or unchecked. Okay, so I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to be able to teach you. So just to summarize, we looked at RenderText, how to enable it. We learned how to use RenderText to create a very complex table and a selector. We learned how to use RenderImage. We learned how to click on locations relative to text or image-based objects, or any object really. And then we learned that complex example.